The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's MWF webinar. My name is Natalie and I am a technical specialist here at Struxoft Solutions. If you don't know much about us, here's a brief introduction. Our principal software, MWF, which stands for Metal Wood Framer, is our Revit wall, floor, ceiling and truss framing tool for light gauge steel and wood modelling. Anesu, one of our technical specialists, will be walking us through our MWF multi-layer tools, including information on wall and floor creation, template creation, and shop drawing settings. Just a couple of housekeeping items to bear in mind before we start. At the end of the webinar, we're going to be taking a few live questions. To be selected, please press the raise hand button on the control panel, and please make sure that your computer audio is working. If you'd prefer, you can also ask questions throughout the webinar in the questions tab of the GoToWebinar dashboard. I will try and answer some of these during the webinar. Right, that's it from me. I will put you in the very capable hands of Anesu now.
Thank you for that, Natalie. I'm just going to change as presenter. If I just move myself over here. Okay. Hello, my name is Anesu. I'm a technical specialist at Struxoft Solutions, also working at the Liverpool office. On my screen, you should be able to see my email address, as well as my extension number. So if you have any further questions after we've completed this webinar, feel free to send those over. Here you can see a list of topics that we'll be looking to go through. So we'll be looking to be covering template mapping, add secondary, multi-layer wall creation and regeneration, multi-layer shop drawings, as well as floor sheathing as well. So without further ado, let's just get started. So if I just go ahead and move this to the other side. So a very powerful tool we have within MWF is the Quick Create button, which is located up here on your MWF Pro Suite ribbon in the wall functionality. So this is a button that allows us to create multiple panels with different templates simultaneously. So for those who are familiar with MWF and have had a play with the single layer functionality, if we were to select all three of these walls, go to our Create button here, we could make 3 panels, however, they would all have the same template. So with this Quick Create, we can actually provide a variety of templates all at once. For the Quick Create to be applied, we'd also be needing to use the template map, which we'll get into just in a second. But before we get too in-depth into the creation of panels within MWF, I'm just going to go into the walls themselves, just to give you a better picture of the layers involved and how MWF can be applied to said layers. So I'm going to just select this wall at the top. I'm going to select Edit Type, and I'm just going to edit the structure. Maybe just add a preview as well, so it's a bit clearer. So you can see here, I have selected my GF ground floor external timber 89mm with these initials TM for template map. I've just added some initials to each of my wall types just to make it clearer, but it wouldn't affect anything necessarily. So as you can see here, we have our makeup of this wall type. We can see here the total thickness at the top is actually 117. However, we've named this wall 89mm. That is because, as you can see in the structural layer here, the thickness is actually read as 89mm. Now, this is an important part of where the framing would actually be populated within MWF. It looks for the structural layer, and it would then apply your light gauge framing or your timber framing to this area here. So for applications of the framing, you would initially probably go for the single layer where you can begin to create, alter with the properties, and save it as a template. For the layers externally from the core boundaries, such as the sheathings, you would look to use the multi-layer functionality over here. So for instance, if you wanted to add things such as OSB or plasterboard, MWF is capable of applying that as well. So if I just press OK, okay again. So as we can see here, I have my 3 wall types, my Timber 89, my LGS 150, and my LGS 70 with an opening at the center. So we're just going to go ahead and click on our template map, which we discussed earlier. And here I'm presented with this window. Now, good practice for anything within Revit or MWF is to try to keep the default and either duplicate or add a new option. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new one here, and we'll class this as webinar. Press OK. And it gives me a new map that is within my project. So I can go about now and go into this map and add 3 slots for the 3 walls that I would like to have quick create functionality for. So if I just add 3 slots here, we can now begin to populate these columns with the information that we would require. So I'm going to add my wall types from top to bottom, so 89 to 70. So I'm just going to stretch this out so I can read it a bit clearer. So I would like my 89 TM template map. I'd like my 150. And I'd like my 70. And as you can see on the side here, the structural layers are also being applied to the columns over here, matching with the wall types that we've named. So we know we're on the right track already. And then now that I've added my wall types, I can go ahead and add the templates that I've made prior as well to this webinar. So as I stated, you can create your structural templates by simply pressing the create button, making your adjustments in the properties, and you can then save these to be viewed and exported or imported in the template manager. So I'm going to start with this one here. I'd like to keep this default 38 by 89 timber templates at 300 spacing, I do believe. Yep. For my 150, I'd like to add my LGS template with some horizontal staggers at 300 spacing as well. And finally, for my 70, I would like to add my template that is using steel again, but this time at 600 spacing, and I have considerations to the opening as well as a K-bracing at the side of my panel. So once I've applied all the information to my wall types as well as the templates I'd like to associate with them, I can simply press OK. And now I can select my 3 wall types here. And now I can finally use my quick create button. And as you can see here now, it will begin to populate my 3 different wall types simultaneously with different templates. And if I just go ahead and hide these walls just to make it a bit clearer. So you can see here now, these framing templates have been applied to would have been applied to the structural layers of the walls. We just hid them for a second just to make it a bit clearer as what we're looking at. So as you can see here, I have my timber 300 spacing. That's the correct member sizes that I required. I have my 150 with 300 spacing as well. However, I have a horizontal stagger from end 1 to end 2 of the panel. And I have finally over here my 70 mil studs with 600 spacing, as well as consideration to the opening. So for instance, I went on the properties and chose to have 2 headers over the top of this and leave it at 1 sill at the bottom. And I've also applied a K-bracing at the side of the panel. So these are just some very simple alterations and modifications you can make to your panels within the properties. And these are easily saved within your template manager and can be applied on other walls. So now we're just going to move on to add secondary. So we've displayed how we can create a single layer wall through the quick create functionality. We can just look here now into how we can convert this single layer wall into a multi-layer wall. So that's quite easily doable. So if I just select these two, I'll create them this time through the more manual approach. So I'll go to my create button. I'm presented with this window. I can go to my templates, and I'm given this option here to look at templates either on the disk, so your device, or within the project. So I'm just going to use this template here, set it as the active, and click close. And I'll go ahead and create these two panels. I'll press OK. So you can see here now I have my two single layer walls created simultaneously. I didn't have to use the quick create button, of course, because these were the same template. So for now, I have my structure in there. I would like to add my secondary layers, like such as my sheathing. So the way, if we wanted to do that, we would have to go over to our multi-layer functionality. To check if your panel is actually ready for multi-layer functionality, you would need to, you could, for instance, go to select one of these members, go to the operations over here on the wall multi-layer area. And if we select wall properties and it was ready for multi-layer functionality, we would be presented with a window for the properties. As you can see, it is not quite ready yet because we haven't actually used the add secondary functionality. So if we were to do it on panel 4 over here, by selecting the architectural wall itself, going back to our operations, and selecting this add secondary tab here. Now, if you pay attention to the panel 4 label, once I select this, you should see a slight change in the panel. So if I just click, we can see that the label has actually moved to the other side now. So that's just a little telltale sign. We can see that add secondary is now active. But also, as I said earlier, we can also check this by simply selecting one of the members, going to our operations, and selecting wall properties. And if I just drag over here, apologies, I'm working on two screens. So we can see here now that we are able to see the properties within this wall via a multi-layer standpoint. And we can actually begin to apply layers to this panel. That was initially a single layer panel. So if I wanted to have the same template for my structure, I can just keep it as that. If I wanted to add sheathing, I'll just go with the defaults for now. I can select into this, this tab here, go through my options to sheathing, and select the default template. So if I'm happy with all of that, as soon as I press OK, the panel will begin to regenerate. And as you can see here now, I have a multi-layer wall. I'll just go about hiding this wall for a second. And we can see now that I have sheathing on the inside and outside of my panel set to the default templates, as well as the structural template that I requested prior. So that is just a quick look at how we can create a single layer wall and convert it into a multi-layer wall. So now we're going to move on to multi-layer wall creation and regeneration. So you don't necessarily have to go through the process of creating a single layer wall and then going through the add secondary process. We can actually come straight out of the gate making a multi-layer wall through the settings over here. So if I have this wall etched in my mind now, the GF external timber 89, and I've added ML just to differentiate between the other wall types I've been using, I can go ahead and go to my settings. I'll just drag this back over to this side. And I'm presented with this window here. So here in the project settings for multi-layer, we are given these 6 categories at the top. We can do a wall type map, quite similar to the template map, where we would apply certain information that would be read by the wall types themselves. We have our structural template, where we can select from the different templates that we've created within within the project. Sorry, we'll get into this on a little later on as well. We have secondary, where we can add secondary layers to our templates. to our walls even, for instance, such as like battens and stuff like this. We can go to opening types, where we can actually dictate how our panel is going to react around openings. We have our sheathing, where we can actually apply sheathing boards, such as if we had, for instance, I don't know, plasterboard or OSB, as mentioned before. We can add those into our templates and modify and adjust them accordingly. We have our nail line settings over here as well. If we wanted to have nail lines applied to our boards and exported to CNC machinery. And finally, member tags over here, where we can select different map options to apply such tags to the members themselves. So for this demonstration, just to get a better understanding of multi-layer and the basis of it, we're going to be focusing on these three options here: the wall type map, the structural template, and the sheathing. So if I go ahead and go over to my structural template, I'm going to be using my 89 timber template again. And as you can see here on the row adjacent just here, the modify tab is actually hollowed out. That is because we wouldn't necessarily do the modifications to these structural templates in the multi-layer. We'd probably more so do it over here in the single layer, where we would create our panels, we would adjust and tinker them, and then save them as templates ready to use within the multi-layer. If we wanted to have templates that we've made prior in different projects or saved in a different location, as I said earlier, we can actually import and export said templates accordingly to what we see fit. Over here in our sheathing, we are presented with this default template that comes out of the gate. We can actually, as I said with the template map, it's always good to keep the default and then either copy or create a new one. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and select this. I'm going to say copy, and I'm going to call this one webinar temp. Would be good if I spelled temp correctly. So if I'm happy with that now, I can press OK. And I can click into this one now and go into the modify tab, which is now not hollowed out, likewise with the structural one, as we can actually make the adjustments over here in the multi-layer. So if I click modify, I'm presented with this window now, where I can begin to make changes to my sheathing, whether that be the family that I wish to use, where you can see here I have sheets that I can have, for instance, 1200 by 1800, or I can even have 1200 by 2400. I'll keep it as the default for now. And this isn't your limitations. Of course, you can load in certain families you are already using or wish to use as well. We have various options in which we can dictate the dimensioning and lengths of the boards themselves. So we can decide if we were to have specific split points of these panels and the minimum sizes. We can actually choose to have extensions to the boards themselves. Whether you apply a positive or negative value can be beneficial as well. For instance, if you wanted to have a cutback at the top of your panel, you can go ahead and add a negative value at the top, and that would actually have a gap at the top of your sheathing, leaving that cutback that you requested in the sheathing extension. We can choose the alignment in which we wish to add our sheathing as well. On top of that, we can have label prefixes, as well as control of the material we want our boards to come in as. So we can have the default material, which we saw in the example on add secondary, or alternatively, we can use the use layer material. So if you were to apply this, the boards would then be added into the model using the material that is actually in the basic wall. So for instance, as you saw on my walls, I have a blue side and I have a pink side depicting external and internal. So that is how they would come in accordingly. You also have these options in here as well. as to the material you wish to add. So there's a lot of capabilities within that. We also have the opening settings here, where we can depict how we want our sheathing to react around openings. So for instance, if we wanted a certain overhang or a cutback, you can apply positive or negative values in here to represent that. Here we have our sheathing layout, where we can depict the layout that the boards will be applied onto the framing. So I have this option at the top for the layout selection. So I can pick a basic tiled, I can pick a horizontal staggered, a vertical staggered, or being placed as placeholders. Below that, we can also select where more specifically we want these members to align. So if we solely wanted them to align to vertical studs and cripples, we can go ahead and tag those, and it would translate when applied onto the framing. And finally, over here as well, we have the nail line settings. So this is where we would be able to apply nail lines to our models, to our boards even, and have these nail lines carrying information that can be sent over to CNC machinery. So that is just a basic look at the changes and adjustments we can do to sheathing. So as I stated prior, the way you'd go about it is copying the default. It's always good to keep your default and just copy or create a new one. I've gone about and doing this prior to the webinar, following the same steps and adding specific modifications to these boards. So for instance, when I said earlier about the extensions and cutbacks, I made an external sheathing template with a cutback at the top. So if I wanted to just double check and display that to you, you can see here that I've used the 1200 by 2400 family, and I've added a negative value at the top of this panel. And on top of that, I've chosen to use the layer material and have a label prefix added to it. So that would be the process of creating your own sheathing templates, to simply copy and make the modifications as you see fit in the options that we just went through. And if we were happy with the settings that we've applied for the sheathing, we can now go back to our wall type map. And here we can see a list on the side of all the wall types present within the project. I'm going to go ahead and just type in GF for ground floor, just to lower the scrolling through to all the wall types. And I'm going to look for my 89 ML. This is the wall I would like to run multi-layer functionality on. So now that I have this selected, I'm presented with this view here. As you can see, it's interactive in the sense that if you hover over an element, it will actually highlight blue. So I'm going to begin to apply different layers that we've created either in the structural templates or the sheathing templating that we just went through earlier. So I'll start at the top with the external finish here. I'll select the tab. I'll go into my sheathing. I'll change the folder that I'm looking in, and I'll select external cutback and press select. I'll do the same for my structure. And finally, for my internal. So if I go to sheathing, pre-webinar, and I'll say internal with a stagger. So if I'm happy with all these things applied, I can press OK. And I can now highlight over the wall types that I would like to run the multi-layer functionality on. And quite similar to template mapping and quick create, we can just simply go to our operations and press quick create. And you can see here now begin to populate and apply the settings we've set for our two wall types here. And as you can see now, we have our multi-layer wall. So we have the cutback we selected prior. We have that negative value of 200. we have our boards here for our interior. If I can just highlight over. So we can see here there's actually a stagger between the two rows here. So that's something we can input to our functionality as well. And as you can see, we have nail lines over here as well, represented as model lines within the boards. So with these nail lines, as stated prior, these will be displayed similar to model lines, just as these green lines. However, these do still hold information that is transferable to the CNC machinery you see fit. For instance, if we were to have these lines set at 100 mil centers, although they will be displayed like this, the information that they carry will still hold that 100 mil centers information and can be read by CNC machinery. So now, for instance, if we wanted to display how we can use this functionality quite similar to the quick create and single layer, if we had numerous walls with different templates within them, we can actually simply will be sure initially to have gone through your settings and applied the specific templates you want applied to your walls. For this example, I have my internal and I have my external here. So I have my two different wall types with two different boarding finishes on them. So I can simply highlight over all of these here, go over to my operations and select quick create. And it will now begin to make all four of these walls. So in a project where you had, internal and external walls and you had different sheathings or structures on these, we can actually go about adjusting them quite easily. A topic that we actually didn't cover just yet also is the regeneration of these panels. So quite similarly to the single layer, if you have had a go with MWF yourself, you will be aware that the regeneration of a panel can be located over here. So if you were to make any adjustments or changes outside of the properties, you can simply press the regenerate button and it would MWF would read the changes you've made and adjust accordingly. So let's say, for instance, we wanted to do the same thing in multi-layer. That's not a problem. We can highlight over this opening, for instance. And let's say we wanted to move this opening to the right by 400. We can see now that we have moved our window opening to the right, and it is now adjusted in position on the wall panel. What we can do, quite similarly to the single layer, is to simply just select something associated to the panel and go over here to our operations, and we'll find the regenerate button here. Now, differently to the single layer regeneration, where you are just simply regenerating the structure, if I select this now and drag it over to this screen, we are presented with these categories now in which we can actually regenerate. So you're not tied down to regenerating one specific instance. You can actually choose to regenerate all, choose to regenerate one specific point that isn't necessarily the structure. For instance, if we just wanted to adjust our sheathing for this kind of adjustment, we can untick everything else and leave this remaining. However, with this kind of adjustment, we'd probably have everything affected by this opening move. So we'd probably leave everything ticked. And as soon as we press OK, the panel will begin to regenerate and move the elements involved accordingly with the change. So you can see here now that the sheathing has actually adjusted, and as well as the structure to match with the movement that I have added to the opening. So over here, just a quick way to display how we can model quite intelligently with the naming we choose to add to our wall types. So for instance, you can see here I have my GF external 89 and above it I have my first floor external 89. So for instance, if I wanted to um, make these two panels, which would have the same structure. However, I would like a different sheathing output on them. A simple way we can actually do that is just adding specific naming types to them. You don't have to follow this procedure. It's just a way to differentiate between the different wall types. And if we went into our settings now, and I drag this over again, if I went to GF, and I just stretch this out a bit just so we can see. And I went to my GF external ML. So you can see here that I have applied a cutback and an internal stagger, but they still have the same structural layer. If I were to go FF for first floor, I would have my templates present here as well. And I've chosen just to have a default plane external that I've created, as well as an internal that I've created. So we have the same structure, however, we would like to apply different sheathings. We can actually do that quite easily with just slight adjustments to the names and how they would be read by MWF. So if I'm happy with the settings I've applied, I can highlight over these two and press Quick Create. And as you can see here, it's now made my two panels. Although they have the same structure, as I've said, I would like a different sheathing on either side, on either of these panels. So I have my cutback here, and I have my stagger at the back, and I just have my default vanilla, if you will, 1200 by 2400 boards at the top on the first floor. So that's just a look at how we can use the multi-layer functionality in terms of just creating them out the gate, regenerating and moving these, and applying them to scenarios such as multiple walls in the same floor that we want to create at once, or different walls that we would like to create on differing levels. So now that we've created these multi-layer walls, we can go on to how we can create shop drawings for said walls. So for those, again, who may be aware, we can create shop drawings for single layer panels over here in our single layer shop drawings to the right. However, we can also create multi-layer shop drawings, which would be located on the left-hand side over here. So if I were to just initially go to my wall drawing operations, select the wall drawing manager, I'll be presented with this window here, which gives me the settings that are present in the project at the minute. I've been working on this one here, so I'll just select this setting and click these three dots to edit. This window will now appear on your screen, and this is where we can begin to make some adjustments and alterations to our shop drawings. So I'm first going to look at the sheet that I have present in these settings, named MultiLayer Webinar. So if I have that selected, I can click my three dots. And here are the actual properties for the sheet itself. So you can see here at the very top the layout name. This is referring to the sheets that we're actually going to be creating. So it's 11 by 17. I believe maybe that's more imperial, the sheet that I was using. For these zones that you can see at the bottom, we can actually go to the project just over here. That is actually the MWF even sheet 11 by 17. And this is where it's actually getting its information from. As you can see here, we have our different zones outlined with different names for their position, as well as different sizes and locations. So within these families, we're able to hold these as the position points for our respective views. We would actually go about saving this sheet as a project, and then within the title block itself, the family here, we would actually save that as a family within the project. So this here is actually a project, and for the title block itself is actually a family. With these, you can actually adjust and change them as you see fit, from its size to its name as well as location. You don't actually have to have this number of views as well. You can actually delete some, add more. The choice is entirely yours. The one that you're seeing on the screen at the minute is actually a default from MWF, but you're not limited to this. As I've said, you can just change and adjust as you see fit. So if I go ahead and open up this again. So the zones that we were just looking at here are actually outlined through this list here. And within this, we can actually choose to add view options, which are located just behind over here, as you can see. So here is where we'd actually choose what we want to show on the sheet, from things such as the 3D or cut list, for instance. This is where we would actually choose to apply these view options. For this section over here, we can actually adjust and change how these sheets would be named once they are applied to once the shop drawing settings are applied to the panel itself. So we can choose to have a fixed name, or we can choose to have it by panel, for example, depending on your need. And this would where you could begin to apply, naming conventions that you have within your companies or projects that you are working on. So if we're happy with that, we can press OK. So we saw how we can edit and adjust the sheet itself, but we also have options into how we can edit the view options individually as well. So for instance, if I click on framing elevation and I go to my three dots again, I'll be presented with this window. And initially it will ask me what dimension styles I would like on my shop drawing. For this example, I've chosen to have the bottom structural for these studs within my panel, and I want my sheathing height as well. So these two will be sufficient for the panel that I'm going to be working on, as I don't have any horizontals or any other major things I need to be dimensioning within this panel. So I can move to the labels now. And the labels here is where we can choose and select the labeling method we would like to apply to our shop drawings. So let's say, for instance, the one I've selected over here, label panel members by method. This will label the individual members, of course, within the panel. The method we'll get into later on as to how, but it will basically read off a specific set of information that we will select from the members. I just move on now. So now to the view settings. As you can see here now, we have the ability to change the orientation in which we want to show this on our shop drawings, the elevation. It doesn't necessarily change the features below. However, it would change the face in which the shop drawing would be showing towards the foreground in this elevation. So as you can see, it does remain the same. However, I would like to show the cutback and this blue face over here. So I'm going to keep it to exterior to interior. We have the capability to change the aspects of this view option, such as the insertion points of this view. We can actually add view templates to these, which we can make externally and then apply to the shop drawing settings, which is what I've gone about in doing. Just adding a bit of transparency to the board so you can see the studs as well. We have the option to change the detail level as well as visual style to this view, as well as the scale itself. We also below here have an option to actually select the layers we want to show within this view as well. So for my instance, I would like to show the studs as well as the interior and exterior sheathing. So I've selected the step structure, and I've selected finish 1 and finish 2. Over here now we can go to the dimension, and this is where you would actually tinker with your dimensioning family. So if you wanted it to offset from the actual panel itself to a certain distance, you can go ahead and apply that. I believe I put 14 mil and 14.4 for whatever specific reason over here. We can actually choose the family in which we would like to dimension with as well. So all the families that are present within your project, you can go ahead and actually select them through this drop down here. Finally, over here in our labels, we have more options to manipulate how we want our labels to be applied to the shop drawings. So as I said prior, with the by method labeling, which we had initially over here in our select view annotations, we can actually begin to choose and pick how we would like these things to be labeled. So I've chosen to label things by positioning, and I've actually applied positioning to this panel prior by simply going to our output/options drop down here, and then we can select the option member positioning. And when we run that, we are going to be given specific labels for our different members. So for instance, in this panel here, we probably would have these these vertical studs coming in as, I believe I named them 002, and the top and the bottom would be labeled as 001, for instance, because they are all similar. So that's how we can label by method. We have the options here to actually change the orientation, alignment, as well as the family that we're going to be using. I'm using the 3.5 mil opaque, which I put into this project here. And we can actually go ahead and select which things we would like labeled as well. So I'm going for my horizontal vertical studs and end vertical studs. So if we were happy with all the information that we have applied in our options here, we can go ahead and press OK. And that information will be fed into the view options, which will be applied to the sheet itself. As I said, you can actually edit into all of these however you see fit. They don't all look the same, of course, as well, because the views differ. So for instance, for a cut list, which is a schedule, the information would differ. I'd only want to show the structure, and over here I can actually pick and choose what data I would like applied, what I would want as a hidden column, for instance, or what I would like to select as a sorting column as well. So there's a wide range of manipulation you can do to the shop drawing settings to tailor each specific need you may have. So if we're happy with the settings that we've created, we can now go ahead and select one of our members over here. And we can go to our full shop drawing button over here. We have this window presented to us now where we can select the settings we want to run on this panel. I'm going to be sure that the right settings are selected, the multi that we were just working on. And I can go ahead and press OK. And if you pay attention to this sheet drop down just here, you should be able to see that once I've run this, a sheet will now be populating just here, named after the sheet, the panel itself even. We also have this detail view drop down now applied as MWF has generated these views for us, the elevation, the plan, and the section, with the 3D for this panel up here as well. So if we go ahead and click onto the sheet, we can see here now that the shop drawing settings has applied the things that we wanted to specify, such as our cut list here for our framing, our sheathing schedule over here. We can see in our elevation that we have the studs dimensioned here with our 300 spacing as best as possible, as well as our dimension for the external sheathing, so I can see the 200 mil cutback at the very top. Also, over the top here, I can actually see where the board would actually span and cut. So where the dimension is kind of pulled back, you can see that's where the end of the board actually is. So I have my slightly smaller board here, 600 by 200, a 2000 even, just over here. And it actually reflects that in the schedule as well. As you can see here, by selecting all of the selecting these views, these are actually all live. So if I selected one element in one view, it'd actually be visible in the others as well. I can actually go into these respective views and manipulate and adjust them as well. So for instance, if I wanted to add a tag for the sheathing, I can go about and doing that as well. So I can just simply go in and make adjustments here as well. So that is just how we can actually go about even creating these. And again, sorry, as I said, the information is live on the views, but it is also live on the schedules that it creates as well. So for instance, if I have EXT3 selected, just down here on the schedule, you can see it. If I were to go ahead and delete this, you could actually see that it's been removed now from our schedule as well. So that is just a quick look at how you can make some other basic shop drawing settings and apply them to said panels. Now we're going to be looking at the final topic, which is the floor sheathing. So we've seen now how we can apply layers to our walls. We're going to look into how we can actually apply layers to our floors as well. So as you can see here, I have a floor panel already created adjacent. It has the 152 by 89 studs, joists even, as well as having these sheathing boards applied on top with a cutback. So we're going to try and mimic that as similarly as possible, which is very possible, by simply going back to our MWF Pro Suite over here. I'm going to select the drop down over here, and I'm going to change to the floor module, which should turn green. So this is a sign to show you that you're now in the floor module. It also says floors everywhere as well, so that helps. So we can go ahead and select our architectural floor, and we're going to go to our create button over here. And eventually it should load. There we go. So quite similarly, there are a lot of similarities to the wall and floor creation. However, there's a slight differ, of course, initially as well, where it asks you to create a using a template initially. So I'm going to select this light gauge template. It also asks you if you would like to frame it now or just leave it as it is. I'm going to leave it as it is to show the more manual approach to creating these panels. So if I just press create. If I were to now go into the properties of this wall, floor even by selecting any aspect, whether it be the floor, the nodes, the label, I can just go ahead and go to my properties. And I'm presented with this window here. Here is where I can make some changes and adjustments to my panel. So I can actually go through any of these and apply adjustments to them as I see fit. So I'm going to just go through these really quickly, as I am aware of time. I'm just going to change all of these to the correct size I would like, the 152 by 89. Use the same as the tracks for these joists, like that as well. So now I have all of my steel members adjusted to my requirements. If I were to press OK on this now, the panel would actually regenerate with the changes I've had in the properties present. If I now wanted to add layers to this, such as sheathing, which we have over here, we can go to our properties, go back to our member properties, and go to the sheathing option here. If I just drag this onto my screen. Here we can actually begin to apply various layers and sheathings to these panels. So initially I need to go ahead and press enable sheathing. And we are presented with the ability to now change and adjust these sheathing boards. So it's actually interactive in the sense of if we were to add a layer, we can see that that's highlighted. If we remove that, we'll just keep it at 1 to match this one over here. We can choose the type in which we want to use. I'm going to keep it at the default. Of course, you can load in different types, of course, as well to apply onto these joists. And you can see here now we can change and adjust the maximum sheet width, the thickness, as well as the first sheet width. We're going to keep it all as the same to match with the panel on the right again. Below here, we can choose the stagger option, which we wish to add, whether it's alternative or offset. With this panel here on the right, we've kept it as alternative. However, we've added a cutback to the left-hand side. So again, similar to the sheathing on the walls, if we just add a negative value, and then we apply that there, that would be present when we go to regenerate the panel. You're not limited to just one side of the floor. You can actually do it on both sides. This one doesn't have it, but we'll just, for instance, add 2 layers at the bottom. We won't add a cutback on this one just to show a bit of differentiation, or this one. However, we'll maintain the same board sizes and thicknesses. So if we're happy with all of that information, we can press OK. And once I press OK here, we should be able to regenerate the panel. So if I press OK. And as you can see now here, we have our sheathing applied at the top with the 200mm cutback on the side. As well as that, we have our 2 layers of sheathing below the floor as well. So that would be how we would apply layers to our floors, as well as just our walls. So that is the last topic. We'll just round off in what we've covered. We've gone through template mapping using the quick create functionality for single layer panels, how we can convert those to multi-layer panels, how we can actually apply the multi-layer functionality out the gate to these panels, as well as adjustments and changes. And finally, we went through how we can add layers to our floors as well. So thank you for your time. I hope this was a beneficial webinar to you. I'm going to pass it over to Natalie now to go through any potential questions we may have.
Thank you, Anesu. Okay, it looks like we have some time to answer some questions. If you'd like to pose a question live, please raise your hand now by clicking on the hand icon in the control panel and make sure that your audio is working properly. While we wait for any remaining questions to come through, I'd just like to remind everyone that the recording of the webinar will be sent through shortly after the session has closed. As always, feel free to share the recording with any colleagues. If you'd like to set up a one-on-one demo, we highly encourage you to reach out to our team after the session has ended. Our technicians will be able to take you through how our MWF modules and extensions can benefit your next project. So let's just have a look and see if any questions have come through. Yep, we've just got one from Anant. I will unmute you just one moment. So, okay. I think you just need to unmute yourself, Anant. Hello?
Perhaps we're going through some technical difficulties on
Yeah.
Anant's end. Perhaps he could type it, actually,
Yeah.
if you wanted to express the question that way, Anant.
Yeah. Okay, we'll just wait just a moment or two to see if we have that question come through.
Sure.
Ah, here we are. So Anant is just asking, how can I get some quantities out of the multi-layer?
Quantities. So if you were referring to quantities such from schedules, I assume?
Yeah, I imagine it's from schedules.
Okay. So yeah, as we stated in the creation of the shop drawing settings that I made, I'll just try and find the sheet. Yeah, I actually had the quantities applied to my cut list as well as my sheathing boards. So I added to the the fields the count and quantity as well. We can actually go into looking into the settings again. Just bear with me. If we go to multi, and let's say, for instance, the framing cut list. If we were going to edit this, so how you would actually get quantities is if, for instance, you had a specific thing you wanted to, uh, quantify within your panel, whether that be the boards or the members themselves, you can actually simply just go into your settings. You can go into the data, go into the option here that you have selected and begin to edit the options. And here we can actually add and apply different fields as to what we want to read. So the reason that I'm able to see the quantities available here in the schedule is because I've chosen to apply these fields here. So I want to add the name, the length of these members, the type of the members themselves, as well as the count. So this is a way you can actually add quantities to your members, and you can also even adjust and change the name for these fields as to how they will be displayed onto your schedules on the shop drawings as well. So that is basically how I went about quantifying and displaying this on my shop drawings and schedules. So I hope that is what you meant, and I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Anesu. And we just have Melvin here who's raised his hand. If he just unmutes himself, he should be able to pose the question now.
Hello.
Hello, Melvin.
Hello. I'm sorry for my English. I'm French.
Good.
Can you repeat, for example, for double ossature, please, in the rail?
Sorry, could you repeat that last bit? Repeat for the what section? Sorry.
Double ossature, double ossature. The ossature. Voilà. Can you show me how to make double bonds?
Double bonds.
Is that
Sure.
double sheathing?
Double tracks frame. Je sais pas comment montrer ça. Pouvez-vous montrer comment faire des doubles ossatures? Sorry.
Sorry, yeah, we should have definitely brushed up on our French as well before this. Apologies for that. If you wanted to, as we have our details available, if you want, you can send over what specifically you want to have a look at. You can send it to either me or Natalie, and we can get back to you with the answer you'd like, if that's comfortable with you.
Thank you for I send an email for my question.
Great, thank you. We'll come back to you a little bit later on today.
Thank you.
I don't know if you can still hear him on your end, Natalie.
Yes, I can still hear him. He's going to send an email over.
Oh.
Okay, so I think that's everything for today. Any questions that you have, again, just like Melvin, send over an email and we'll make sure we get to them today. Once again, thank you, Anesu, and thank you to everyone who registered for the webinar. I just want to mention quickly to stay tuned. We'll have a webinar every Wednesday for the next few weeks. Next week's topic is going to be released over the next few days, so keep an eye out. And we will now be ending the webinar. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.